Jane King, thanks for joining us on the Illinois channel from the NASDAQ.
Great to be with you, Terry.
For those who viewers are watching, Jane and I have known each other for probably about 20 years. She used to work at WAND in Decatur, Illinois, and now is known around the country as a financial reporter who covers what's going on in the markets. And Jane comes to us from the NASDAQ studios. But we're talking to Jane specifically today about a recent trip she took to Vietnam. And Jane, for many Americans, Vietnam was long a nightmare that lasted throughout the 1960s, the war that wouldn't end. And now you had the opportunity recently to go visit Hanoi, which was the what we used to call North Vietnam and the headquarters of Vietnam today. What was, we want to talk to you about, why did you go there, and more specifically, what were your impressions of Vietnam, which after all those years of being in the headlines, we rarely hear anything about Vietnam today.
That's right. Well, a company called Tomo Chain, which is a blockchain-based digital currency company, brought me to Vietnam to do a profile with their CEO. They were doing, it was kind of a bit of a media junket that was going on. I'm friends with the PR person that represents this company. And so that was the main driving force for bringing me to Hanoi. It was really interesting because I left on September 12th, and I really kind of firmed up the plans to go about 5 days before that. So it's a little bit of a last minute trip, but I just thought it sounded so interesting to go to Vietnam. I mean, it's a place like, my mom didn't even want me to go. She was worried about it. She asked me not to tell her when I go to places like that until I come home. But I found it to be really interesting, completely safe, and had a lot of really interesting opportunities for business and economics.
When you were there again for how many days?
I was actually in Vietnam for 3 days. The whole trip was 5, but it's a 15-hour flight to Taiwan, and then another 3 hours to Hanoi. So it was 2 full days of travel, longest flight I've ever been on. It's interesting in and of itself, and I actually was completely entertained on the plane watching my route to get there, because we went up by the Arctic Circle, we went over Russia, and they would show on the screen these little towns that we were going over as we were making our way over to Asia. And I was writing them down on my phone because I wanted to look them up when I got home and find out there's these little tiny towns in Russia and on the peninsula that nobody ever visits. And I just found that an interesting part of the trip, to be on the other side of the world.
The trip you took there, did you have much opportunity to talk to the people and the average person? And did you also just talk to them about their impressions of the United States? After all, Hanoi was carpet bombed by the Americans in December of '72, just before we signed a peace agreement with them. What is the impression of those in Vietnam today towards America? And to what extent are they welcoming of having American business interests come there?
Well, I spent the first day and a half mainly with the company, and they took us out to eat and really showed us a great time. And I found the Vietnamese people to be wonderful and hospitable and kind, and in no way at all did I feel any animosity because I'm American. They took us to lunch, and then they took us to a dinner and gave me a gift, and then they spent the next day, which was a Saturday, at Halong Bay, which is beautiful. So it was about a 3-hour drive from Hanoi to Halong Bay. They rented a bus, and we went down there and took a cruise for the night, and they had all these things planned around it. We fished for squid, we kayaked in the bay, we hiked, went through a cave. They had a cocktail party on the top of the boat one night, and it was just really, really nice. And I did not get the sense at all that anybody, and obviously not Vietnamese. And I walked around one day. I was close to the main lake in Hanoi, and I just was like, I'm just going to go explore. And I did all this on Google Maps. I was a little nervous, don't know the language, but I just followed Google Maps, made my way to the lake. And there were people, it was kind of like Central Park in New York. There were people doing Tai Chi. There were people just sitting around the lake, playing cards, talking, conversing. It was like a gathering place for the community. And there were 3 or 4 like older men there, and they kind of looked at me and waved at me, and I waved back at them, and I just thought that they were nice and welcoming, and actually had a great sense of humor. I did tour the Hanoi Hilton, the prison where John McCain was. And it's open for tourists, so you buy a ticket and go in, and you can see they have kind of almost like mannequins there, as if they were prisoners of war. They have locks over their ankles, over one ankle, so they can't move. But they also showed you a jail cell, and they had a mannequin in there, so you could see what that was like. They had a little bit of outdoor space. They had an old prison uniform.
So was that the famous Hanoi Hilton we often?
That was the famous Hanoi Hilton.
What?
Yeah, where John.
How creepy was that, or was it weird to be saying that, or how did it match your impressions? Have you heard of it?
No, it was strange to be there, and of course they thought about John McCain the whole time I was there. And there's a picture of him there meeting a government official. I'm not sure it was the mayor of Hanoi, but he had written a note on there and said, to the wonderful people of Hanoi, thank you. I mean, it seemed like he had no ill will at all toward Hanoi, but it was a strange place to be. I mean, a prison is just strange, and you think about all the history and what happened and all the baggage that we have with Vietnam, and it's just a really thought-provoking place.
I want to roll a bit of video that you sent to us. I think you took this on your cell phone, and we patched some of it together, but let me begin this and just give us, as you would, almost showing us your home movies, tell us what we're looking at here.
So that's Ha Long Bay. So that is an area, it's about 3 hours south of Hanoi, and it's a touristy area. Beautiful. This is a geological wonder. Those are rocks, just kind of huge rocks sticking out of the bay. And we were on a cruise ship, not like a huge Carnival cruise ship, but half that size. And a lot of boats on there, a lot of nature, and just enjoying the scenery. I mean, you can see how peaceful the water is. It was just a very relaxing thing. Now, that's an old Vietnamese fishing boat, and you saw a lot of those in the bay. And I tried to take as many pictures of those as I could, because they just reminded me so much of what Vietnam was like. These fishermen, they're trying to make a living. They've got these old boats, and that's the lake in Hanoi again. And
it's interesting to see that, and glad, finally for all the people, the Americans as well as the Vietnamese, that we're at peace now. What other impressions? Actually, let me roll some other, as long as we're getting this. You also sent some street scenes so people can get an idea of what Hanoi looks like. You didn't get the opportunity, as you say, it was 3 days. You didn't get to tour the entire country or get out of the city, I guess, too much.
Well, just the Ha Long Bay.
Yeah. Let's take a look at some of the street scenes, and just then you can give us your impressions.
So it's very crowded. I mean, I live in New York City, so I'm kind of used to that, but very crowded, little tiny shops, all kind of jammed together. I don't know if you can see it very well in some of these places, but there was a lot of low-hanging electrical wires, which made me a little nervous. Maybe you can see it there in that photo. If you notice all the motorbikes. So Vietnam, one of these Southeast Asian nations like Thailand and Indonesia, that there's so many motorbikes, and I asked them why so many, and they said it's for traffic reasons. It just helps people get in and out of traffic more. They can get where they need to be quicker. But they are just everywhere, and they're beeping and honking. And I mean, that's a great scene of it right there. And crossing the street is a little bit like taking your life in your own hands. So what you do is you look for a gap, and you just walk, and you just keep at the same pace, and you just cross the street, and they move around you. And it works. It somehow works. They're all like, it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. They're all like just faced forward and driving, and they are conscious of you there, and they just drive around you and go. And just the only thing, you can't stop and like get nervous. You just got to, once you commit, you just got to walk across the street and go.
I was surprised at, I didn't know what to expect, and that's the thing, I'm like a lot of Americans, you just never see any coverage of Vietnam. We saw a little bit when the president met with the leader of North Korea there, but there wasn't a whole lot of coverage of Vietnam.
Here's a little piece of, well, the hotel where I stayed was the same hotel where Kim Jong-un stayed.
Oh, huh.
So And his picture was there, along with a lot of other leaders. I think it's the place where government leaders stay when they go to Hanoi.
Was it a nice hotel?
It was really nice. They had a delicious breakfast. They have noodles for every meal. So I've been to Germany. You know how in Germany they have pretzels and sausage for every meal? In Vietnam, they had noodles for every meal. So they had pho, which up until I went to Vietnam, always called it pho. But it is pho, which I found out from the Vietnamese, and delicious. And by the way, their food was just excellent. I did not have a bad meal while I was there. Very healthy, a lot of vegetables. Vietnam has the lowest obesity rate in the world. So they really eat well there.
I wouldn't have guessed that, although I never, as you say that, I don't think of there being like obese people when I think of Vietnam. You know, I remember the American soldiers used to say it was so hot and humid there, they sometimes had a hard time breathing. Just as far as walking around and your overall impressions, was it hot? Do they have air conditioning there? What kind of things is, if a businessman's going over there, first of all, I don't know, would they go to Hanoi or would they go more to South Vietnam, which I think even today is maybe a little bit more welcoming or accustomed to Americans, just because it was in the South that the Americans were stationed during the war.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the people who lived there told me that they felt like Ho Chi Minh City was a little younger and a little more hip. I didn't go there, so I don't know. But Hanoi is the capital, so that would be, and they actually have a pretty advanced financial district. So this company that I went to visit, Tomo Chain, was in that new part of the city with a lot of skyscrapers. I mean, and it was, you know, it looked like 5 to 10 years old. It was really nice. Yes, air conditioning everywhere. It is hot and humid. It's like standing in the New York subway platform in July, and it's 95 degrees outside. So, you know, and it's funny, as a TV person, I would, you know, do my hair to get ready to do the things on camera, and then I'd walk outside and I'm like, why bother? I mean, it was all curly. It was curly the whole time I was there. So, yes, hot and humid, but I don't remember being especially uncomfortable while I was there. You just kind of dress for it and get into air conditioning when you can.
You mentioned that the, is it Tomo Chain or Tama Chain, you said?
Tomo Chain.
And what is it they do? Tell us about it. They wanted you to come over. Why did they want you to come over, and what did you in fact learn about them? And to that extent, not just about one company, but what did you take away as far as the lessons of doing maybe business there? What would you tell those American businesses watching us about, you know, doing business in Vietnam?
Well, so Tomo Chain is a company that has a digital wallet. So they're part of the new digital crypto future that some people see is coming. They've got a way for you to make transactions financially through their wallet that take less than 2 seconds. And, you know, it was interesting when I was there because I was talking to the CEO. Before I went to my bank in New York, which is Chase, huge bank, and asked for $100 US dollars worth of Vietnamese dong. I always like to go to a country with a little bit of cash in case I needed to pay a cab or something like that. 23,000 dong to 1 US dollar. So when I left the bank, I had 2 million dong. So I may never be a millionaire except in Vietnamese dong. But
is it actually where you're walking around with just a load of cash, of paper money?
Yeah, I had it in my wallet. And when I left, I asked the concierge at the hotel how much dong to get to the airport, and it was 451,000.
Wow.
So it's just funny. But my point was that Chase said we don't have that currency here. It will take 3 days to get it. And so they called me when it came in, and I went there and picked up my dong and took it. But I thought, gosh, wouldn't a digital currency, as we get more interconnected globally, you know, whether it's Bitcoin or something else, and even if people keep their own sovereign currencies, a separate digital currency that I could use in any country in the world, and that everybody would have a wallet. And I just felt like this was a good example of how that would have been useful to use. So, but in terms of, so this particular CEO of Tomo Chain, he went to school in the United States, and he is a developer, software developer, coder, and once knows, like, he's created an amazing technology infrastructure, but knows he needs help marketing. And that was the driving thing behind bringing the media here, was to help him kind of get the word out about the company, because their main goal right now is to attract more users and to gain their user base and downloads of their app and so forth. So that's what that was all about. And he really wanted to come back to Vietnam and help that economy and bring his family there. And he does a lot of business in Southeast Asia, but would like to expand to the US as well. So now, in terms of just my overall impressions of the economy, first of all, it's very efficient. So things are on time. They're where they say they're going to be. People are helpful. Like, all those things are just good for a functioning economy. They have a lot of pollution, I noticed. I think that's pretty common in Southeast Asia. And I feel like that's one thing that needs to be fixed before they really become a true global power, if they ever do. A lot of that I know comes from China and Malaysia. Now, Vietnam has been replacing China to some extent through all these trade wars because of costs and trade tensions in the manufacturing business. So they're a growing economy. They're growing 6-7% a year. So some of the fastest growing economies.
Did you say 6,000% a year?
6 to 7%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. 6 to
After
7.
talking about 450,000 dong to get
Yes.
to the airport, I thought these are big numbers we're using.
No, yeah. Economic growth, 6 to 7%.
But 67% is amazing. My goodness. You know, China,
really
we
is.
think is amazing because they grow at maybe 6%. So 67%. Is there actually, speaking of the NASDAQ, is there an ETF for the Vietnamese economy if one wants to just invest in their overall economy? Do you know?
Good question, but I do not know. But that would be an interesting thing to investigate. And I know, Jim Rogers is a famous kind of macro investor, and he loves the Vietnamese economy. And so I think if there's not, or even a Southeast Asian economy, because other countries in that region are doing a lot of interesting things, growing their economies as well. Now, it's still a socialist country. There's statues of Ho Chi Minh around. So those kind of things are still lingering. Those are, kind of hard to work out of. Those are generational. But, I still believe that, the state controls most, if not all, the private land. So, and there's a lot of poverty. I mean, people eat. I feel like it's the poverty rate is decreasing, but I still like people are eating outside on stools, at little tables, and things like that. So, there's a lot of that still, but it seems like it's an up and coming economy.
Speaking, both of the fact that it is run by communists. I mean, that's why we were fighting there. But is the communist government? Can you see? I mean, maybe you don't know because you were only there 3 days. How much you were able to find out is questionable, I guess. But you said there's air conditioning. Do you have any inkling as far as is there connectivity today? We want to be connected to the internet to do business. So if one sets up a business there, is there broadband connection? Is the electricity system reliable? We saw those wires hanging low.
Yeah.
But is there the basic infrastructure within that economy to be able to do business and do it where you could communicate with branches around the world, or back if your headquarters was in New York City where you are?
Yeah. Well, in fact, I was keeping in touch with a person who was filling in for me back in New York because she needed some help writing, editing videos, loading things. Internet was fast. I had no problem doing that. I was able to get on all the websites that I normally get on, and there are a lot of journalism websites, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Somebody told me, I have a friend who's in the military here in New York, and he said, you may not be able to get access to all the websites, but I was able to do that. I didn't feel like there was any censorship at all. Again, I was only there 3 days. I don't know, what it would be like to live there for a long period of time, but I sensed no interference in my able to access websites and communicate with New York at all.
Let me talk about labor. We talked a little bit about China and how Vietnam, we used to have plants going to China because it was cheaper in labor, and even with the cost of shipping. We all know what's going on now with the trade war with China, but also over the years, China's economy has grown. Their people have grown wealthier, even though they too are a communist nation. It seems like these communists have found out that by dabbling in free enterprise, they can raise the living standard of their people, which is rather ironic.
It is. No, I thought about that, and I was thinking about that because I was like, there's almost like a new qualification of government or how government is run, because you think communist, you can't even buy bread and all this stuff. You can get anything there. But yet the private land is still an issue. I believe the government owns most, if not all, of the land. That I probably would depend on the industry, but they do seem very tech friendly. But yeah, it's interesting to see the communist and socialist countries doing so well economically, or at least having economic growth. We did go through an area of town that was called the Old Quarter, and that's got a really beautiful French architecture, because the French also had a big influence in Vietnam as well. And they said that was the most expensive part of town. I didn't really want to ask them what the rent was, because I live in New York where rent's ridiculous, and it just, I was like, okay, but if your average salary is, $2,900, I can't imagine it would be too expensive to rent an apartment. The last night that I was there, we were done with the group tour, and I was walking around. I went down by the lake again, and I went up to a restaurant, and I got a meal and a beer. And I tipped her, and I put it on my American Express card. So they took American Express, and it came to about $7.50. So I thought that was pretty good. That would be like 30 here in New York, probably, all of that together. So I did notice a lot of U.S. brands in Vietnam. I tried to take as many pictures as I could. They had Pringles in the stores. There was a KFC. There was Budweiser. I saw Burger King in the airport. Coca-Cola. I'm like, this is not, I hate to admit it, but I love Coca-Cola. And I was at dinner one night, and all I'd had up to that point was tea and water. And I was like, do you have a Coca-Cola? And he said, yes. And I was like, yes, you have Coca-Cola. It was terrible, and it tasted so good. But they had a lot of big American brands there. So there's an influence, American influence there for sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did see you sent us a picture, and there was a KFC. I think there was a fountain, and again, and you were in Hanoi, and I did notice the KFC in the background. Before we end, let's talk a little bit, if we might. Just tell us again what you do for those who haven't had the opportunity to see Jane King doing the morning reports. You actually do how many live shots a day from the NASDAQ to local television stations around the country?
There's like 22 live shots all across the country. I go by the time zone. So I start in Florida and North Carolina, move to the Midwest, and then the Mountain West, and then I finish in Seattle and Portland and San Diego. So I do those reports every day. We do an ag and energy report that airs on WAND locally. And also I do a tech report every day, and a wellness report, and kind of the business of wellness. And I'm here every day doing this for a syndicated product for local TV stations around the country.
And I know on LinkedIn you have interviews with some business leaders on things. And in fact, one of the things that, as I've told you on the telephone sometimes when we talked, you do stories on blockchain, which I guess is something of a new thing. And while I like to think of myself as being somewhat financially literate, I have no clue what blockchain is. I just never got my head wrapped around that one.
All right. Well, let me think of it. So it's a computer code, and it's the technology behind Bitcoin, even though blockchain can be used for a lot of things besides Bitcoin. But it's like, just think of it as like blocks. Like here's a block, and they call them each nodes, and each one is kind of its own thing that one person sets up. So it's decentralized in terms of not one central force makes this. It's built together by a lot of different people creating these nodes, and that builds the whole blockchain. And the secret sauce here is that it can't be hacked, at least not yet. Nobody's been able to hack the blockchain yet. And it can be used for a lot of things. It can trace food. So if there's a recall of beef, for example, you'll know immediately within 2 seconds. Let's go to the blockchain and let's find out where that beef came from, and let's shut down that farm until we figure out what's going on. You could use it for pharmaceuticals. It's been used in artworks. You can trace the authenticity of a piece of art. Some countries, I know like India, have a lot of problems with people faking their credentials. their university credentials and their professional credentials. This would be able to, you could have all of that on a blockchain, so a potential employer can make sure that you have the credentials that you say you do. So there's a lot of different applications for blockchain, and a lot of companies are using this in their back office, like IBM and Accenture and Salesforce. And so it's not as like prevalent as the internet. It's more of a back office thing that helps streamline and make operations more efficient.
But just, you mentioned, what are some of the big trends? You mentioned Jimmy Rogers. Jimmy Rogers was a partner, I believe, to George Soros, when,
Yes.
and Jimmy Rogers moved over to Asia
Singapore.
because he thought that's really where it's happening. And of course, we've been just talking about Vietnam, which is, as you say, growing at 67% and up and comer. If you were just to give a quick snapshot of some of the trends, do you follow trends like that, in that the rise of Asia, the blockchains? How do you kind of keep your fingers on the pulse of what's happening, and what do you find some of the more exciting ideas and trends that are percolating right now in the world economy?
Well, the group that I met in Vietnam had just come from Singapore because there was a conference there, and I actually got invited to that too, but it was a little bit too much time away from New York, and I couldn't quite swing that, so I just did the Vietnam leg of the trip. But they loved Singapore. They felt like it was run well, brand new buildings. They said more beautiful buildings than they see in the United States. So there is this kind of sense that our infrastructure here is getting old and needs to be updated. Nobody can figure out how to pay for it and all that. But you know, in terms of just like overall trend, I know like Asia's really adapting to the crypto technology much more. We have a stable currency, and so I don't think feel quite the need to do that as much as some other countries do. So they're a little bit ahead of us there. Although it feels like Congress is kind of starting to catch on to what's going on and figure out a way to regulate it so that they don't stifle innovation, but also, you know, don't cause problems for investors as well. I think, you know, I don't, in terms of big, I mean, AI is huge, and these all kind of overlap with blockchain.
Right.
I mean, and the whole data thing, I mean, all of that is going to be absolutely so big, I think, still. And Internet of Things is going to give us so much more data about people and direct marketing to people that that's probably where the future is headed.
You know what I find interesting, and we'll end soon here, but just the whole interconnection. When, you know, a lot of people don't follow business, as you know, but I find if you want to follow politics, you can't be doing that by not following also business, because when we talk about things like 5G, what the trade war with China, so much of this is behind the scenes of what's going on, and these issues are so interrelated. You know, the factory you work at could be very well owned by a foreign owner, and just if you want to invest for your own retirement or just your own wealth income in your family and all that. As we say, maybe it would be good to invest in a Vietnam economy or elsewhere.
I think it's absolutely crucial to the future of the U.S. economy is to have that good infrastructure. And we have ignored it for far too long. And other countries are improving their infrastructure, and we're kind of ignoring it. I mean, I do get this sense that in Asia, at least, that they kind of feel like the U.S. has peaked, and they're the next big leader in the world. I don't think it has to be that way, but I don't get the sense that there are very many people in Washington. There's at least not a consensus in Washington that something needs to be done about that. They're focusing on much more what I consider to be unimportant things.
Jane, you're the most efficient person I ever knew. And I always am. It's like 22, I think, would you say 22 live shots, or is that?
Yes.
No one, I don't know of anyone else that could do that many live shots. Most reporters do like maybe 2 to 3 at most in a day. So 22 is just insane. But you pull it off, and congratulations to you. And if people want to follow you, we put your Twitter feed up.
But we're adding a new afternoon report at the end of October.
Oh, good.
I'm not going to be doing it. It's another reporter out of California. So his name is Brian Sully Sullivan. He's on the radio and is doing in television. So you might maybe have heard of him
I think he
on
used
the
to be on
radio.
CNBC, didn't he? Or is that a different reporter? Maybe not.
I don't know. I need to look at his bio and find out. I know he's doing radio right now, and we're going to do some radio stuff together. But he starts October 21st, so look forward to that.
Well, congratulations on your growing business, and we appreciate your time. I know you're always busy there at the NASDAQ, and we thank the NASDAQ for allowing you to use their studio. So we'll say goodbye today. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we can do this again.
Great to talk to you.
Thanks so much.